I have the good fortune to recall my association with Professor Madhusudan Reddy. I divide my memories into three parts. First, I shall highlight very briefly about my assessment of Professor V. Madhusudan Reddy as a philosopher and thinker. Secondly, I'll talk about him as an institution builder. And finally, I shall sum up my own feelings about him as a person. Professor V. Madhusudan Reddy was a very idealistic thinker, and his work on the concept of the supermind in Sri Aurobindo is probably the first doctoral dissertation to be done in the area of Sri Aurobindo studies. I think he was uniquely privileged in the sense that his work was seen by Sri Aurobindo before he passed away. And this is something that we all recognize as unique in the history of Sri Aurobindo studies. Professor Reddy was very well read and very well informed about the academic discipline of philosophy. But he was not drawn to philosophy as an area of study in the conventional sense. By philosophy he meant darshan and sight, and that is why one of the institutions that he founded was called Sri Aurobindo Darshan. And the philosophy which Professor Reddy practiced as an intellectual was therefore very different from the conventional understanding of philosophy as a very dry discipline. And Professor Reddy wrote philosophy as an inspired poet. He did not bother about name and fame, although he devoted himself as a philosopher in Osmania University and elsewhere, and was recognized as an outstanding philosopher of his own times. Secondly, we find that Professor Reddy was an institution builder par excellence. Usually, the Krishna, Paramahansa and Vivekananda, namely the quality of a visionary and the quality of a man of action, do not go together. Professor Reddy was uniquely gifted in the sense that he breached this gap. He was not only a great thinker, but he had an eye for the smallest of the details, and he had great power of architectural design. So the number of institutions that he has built, they reveal the stamp of his own talents. Another thing that Professor Reddy did, and this is something that I noticed and his admirers noticed, is that he could never think small. Whatever events he organized were always called international. It was an international seminar, it was an international symposium. And therefore I think much before the word internationalism became a buzzword, Professor Reddy was moving in that direction. Finally, my views of Professor Madhusudan Reddy as a person. Those who knew Professor Madhusudan Reddy always found him warm-hearted, kind and compassionate. He was indulgent to the extent of being at fault. And there were many people to whom he had done a good turn, but he never expected anything in return. All that he wanted is that the recipients of his generosity would do well in life. And therefore there was no demand that he made. There was no sense of obligation that he demanded from people. And this is something that I have noticed when I saw him from close quarters. I myself have been the recipient of his own generosity. And he always took pride in the fact that I did well in my studies, in my scholarship, and he rejoiced in all my academic and personal successes. So I can do no better than to recognize the uniqueness and the greatness of Professor Reddy on all three grounds: as a philosopher, as an institution builder, and as a great humanist who was influenced by the spiritual ideals of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo.